Roughly 1 in 5 American households clears $1 million in net worth. But only around 6 million Americans hold $1 million in actual investable cash. The gap between those two numbers is not a rounding error. It is where a lot of genuinely hardworking people are quietly stuck, feeling financially anxious despite doing everything right. If you are 35 to 55, earning well, watching your net worth climb, but still feel like your checking account does not match the story your balance sheet is telling, this is not a willpower problem. It is not a savings rate problem. It is a structure problem, and most of it lives in one single place you cannot easily touch. The math on this is stranger than most financial advice will ever tell you. Now let's start with the number everyone celebrates. When you hear the word millionaire, your brain builds a very specific picture. Someone who can write a check for almost anything. Someone who could stop working next Monday and be fine. Someone who has options. The net worth number feels like a finish line. You hit $1 million, you cross into a different category. That picture is not wrong, it is just deeply incomplete. Here is what is actually hiding inside most $1 million net worths. Picture a single tall bar on a graph. That bar is your total net worth, called $1 million. Now imagine someone slowly shading large sections a bit gray. The gray sections represent money you cannot spend, cannot withdraw, and cannot deploy into your life until you go through an expensive, slow, and complicated process to unlock it. The bar did not shrink. The number at the top did not change. At a slice you can actually reach, the white section at the bottom is much smaller than the full bar suggests. For most American millionaires, more than half of that bar is gray. In many cases, it is closer to 2/3. The white section, the part you can actually use, is often $300,000 or $400,000 out of $1 million headline. That white section is your real number. This is what I call the paper millionaire problem. Your net worth statement says one thing, your actual accessible wealth says something quite different. And the gap between those two numbers is what determines whether you have real financial freedom or just a very impressive spreadsheet that makes you feel better on Sunday afternoons. The biggest source of gray in that bar is your home. And the reason this matters so much more than most people realize comes down to a single rule that almost everyone gets wrong. Let me show you exactly how this plays out. Meet Marcus. Marcus is 54 years old. He has been disciplined his entire adult life. He and his wife bought their house 20 years ago in a decent neighborhood. They paid down the mortgage, steadily skipped the cash out refinances, never treated the house like a piggy bank. The house is now worth $650,000 and they owe $150,000 on it. That is $500,000 in equity sitting in those walls. They also have a 401k with $380,000 built up over 3 decades of steady contributions. A brokerage account with $70,000, checking and savings of $55,000 for emergencies and daily expenses. Marcus adds it up on a Sunday afternoon and sees the number he has been quietly working toward for 30 years. Just over $1 million. He leans back in his chair. He feels for the first time genuinely wealthy. Then he starts planning retirement. He wants to stop working at 62 8 years away. He pulls up a retirement calculator, types in $1 million, and reads about the 4% rule. The calculator tells him he can safely withdraw 4% in year one, roughly $40,000, then adjust for inflation each year after that. He and his wife figure they can live on $40,000 plus Social Security. The numbers feel right. He closes the laptop feeling like the plan is solid. He's making one of the most expensive structural errors in personal finance. The 4% rule was not built on your total net worth. It was built on liquid, investable assets. The kind you can actually withdraw from year after year without selling your house, paying transaction fees, or taking on new debt. Stocks, bonds, cash, and brokerage accounts. Bill Benjamin, the financial planner who created the rule in the 1990s, confirmed this when asked directly. The primary residence does not count. The stack needs to be liquid. Marcus can now withdraw 4% of his house. Not on a Tuesday, not in a medical emergency, not in the first year of retirement when he needs the money to actually show up in his checking account. When you strip out the home equity and recalculate, Marcus's liquid wealth is $380,000 in his 401k, $70,000 in his brokerage, and $55,000 in savings. That is $505,000. 4% of 500 is $20,200 a year, not $40,000. Roughly half of what he planned for. Marcus has $1 million net worth and a retirement income that puts him and his wife in a genuinely difficult position before Social Security kicks in. That is not a catastrophe, but it is a $20,000 a year gap built invisibly into a number that felt completely safe. And Marcus is not unusual. He is statistically the median. According to Federal Reserve and Census Bureau data for Americans in their 50s to early 80s, home equity represents between 59 and 73% of total net worth. For homeowners, specifically, the 2022 Survey of Consumer Finances found that primary residence equity was the single largest category of net worth across the board. Larger than retirement accounts, larger than all financial investments combined for the typical household. Think about what that means for a moment. For the average American with $1 million net worth, the biggest asset they own is one they live inside and cannot easily convert to income. If you want to understand why so many high earners feel broke, this is a big part of the answer. Subscribe to the Compound Classroom if you want more of this kind of math. We do one of these every week and it is free. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but I can access that equity if I need to. I can get a home equity line of credit. I can do a reverse mortgage when I am older. I can always sell. Fair enough. Let me show you what accessing frozen wealth actually costs, because every path has a toll booth. Selling is the most complete way to unlock equity. You get the full value, pay off the mortgage, and walk away with cash. But the transaction cost is 8 to 10% of the sale price. That is commissions, closing fees, and transfer costs. On a $650,000 house, that is $52,000 to $65,000 gone before you see a dollar. The toll booth just took a year of retirement income, and you still need somewhere to live. A home equity line of credit is cheaper to open, but it is still debt. You are borrowing against your own wealth at a market interest rate currently well above 5% in most markets. You need to qualify based on income and credit score. And when the draw period ends, the repayment period begins and your monthly expenses jump. You have not freed the equity. You have mortgaged it again with a new set of terms. A reverse mortgage is available at 62 and older. It lets you stop making payments and draw income from your equity without selling. But origination fees run between $2,500 and $6,000 at closing. The outstanding balance grows over time as interest accrues against you, reducing what remains for your heirs. And you must continue paying property taxes, insurance, and maintenance throughout. Miss those payments and the lender can call the loan. 3 paths, 3 toll booths. The money is yours on paper, but paper does not pay a hospital bill at 68. Paper cannot tell your boss on a random Wednesday that you are done. Only liquid wealth does those things. This is what I call the frozen wealth trap. The equity accumulates, the net worth number climbs. The spreadsheet looks spectacular, but the actual financial freedom it represents is a fraction of the headline figure. Frozen wealth is real wealth that has been locked inside an illiquid container, and the cost to unlock it is high enough that most people just leave it there. The deeper problem runs underneath even this. Because our entire cultural framework for measuring financial success is built on the wrong metric. Net worth is what gets celebrated. Net worth milestones are what people announce. Financial media covers net worth because it is the biggest, most impressive version of the number. But tracking total net worth as your primary financial scorecard is like measuring the total size of a warehouse instead of how much inventory you can actually ship out the door tomorrow. Liquid net worth is the number that determines your real options in the real world. It determines whether you can take 6 months off to deal with a serious illness. It determines whether a bad year at work is inconvenient or genuinely threatening. It determines whether retirement at 62 is a decision you get to make or a number you have not reached yet. Total net worth tells you how the balance sheet reads. Liquid net worth tells you how free you actually are. Here's the second layer. Because most people never separate these two numbers cleanly, they set retirement targets that are structurally wrong from the start. Aim for a total net worth goal, hit it, feel the relief of having arrived, and then run the real calculation for the first time 3 years before they want to retire. That is when the gap appears. And closing a $200,000 liquid wealth gap at 59 is a very different problem than closing it at 44. The strongest objection here is worth taking seriously. Home equity is not nothing. Over the long run, homeownership has been one of the most effective wealth building mechanisms available to middle class Americans. Homes in strong markets appreciate faster than inflation. The leverage involved amplifies those gains. Paying down a mortgage is a form of forced savings that many people would not replicate on their own. For families who stay in the same home for 30 or more years, particularly in high appreciation markets, the math on owning can be genuinely compelling. That case is real, but it requires specific conditions to line up: a long holding period, an appreciating market, and a concrete plan for converting the equity into income when you actually need it. Most people accumulate the equity and assume the wealth is equivalent. That assumption is exactly where the trap closes. There is one more layer that most people miss. Even among people who understand the liquid versus total distinction, there is a timing problem. The gap tends to appear at the worst possible moment. Not at 40 when you have 20 years of runway, not at 50 when you have a decade. It tends to show up at 59 when someone runs the real calculation for the first time because retirement suddenly feels concrete. Closing a $200,000 liquid gap at 59 is a very different problem than closing it at 44. The earlier you run this calculation, the more options you have. So here is the protocol. 3 steps you can run this week. Step 1 is to calculate your actual liquid net worth right now. List only the assets you can convert to cash within 30 days without losing more than 2% to fees, taxes, or penalties. Brokerage accounts count. Your 401k and IRA balances count with the caveat that early withdrawal before 59.5 triggers a 10% penalty plus income taxes. So adjust if you are under that threshold. Health savings account balances count. High yield savings accounts count. The primary residence does not count. Your car does not count. Add up what remains. Write that number down separately from your total net worth. That is your real retirement number. For many people, saying it written separately for the first time is genuinely clarified. Step 2 is to recalculate your retirement income using only that liquid figure. Take the number you just wrote down and multiply it by 0.04. That is your 4% withdrawal for year 1. Is it enough to cover your annual spending in retirement? If yes, you are in a stronger position than you probably realized. If the answer is no, you now know the actual size of the gap. Not the gap between 0 and $1 million, but the gap between your liquid stack today and the liquid stack you actually need. That number is actionable. You can build toward it by redirecting savings into liquid accounts and building a concrete timeline. Step 3 is to stop treating home equity as your emergency fund. This matters more than it sounds. A lot of people in their 40s and 50s carry very little in liquid savings because the equity position feels like protection. And emotionally, it does feel like protection. But equity cannot pay for a transmission replacement on a Thursday. It cannot cover 3 months of expenses after a sudden layoff while you look for the next role. Your emergency fund needs to be cash or near cash accessible in 48 hours, completely separate from the house. 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account. That is the buffer. The equity is separate. It is long-term wealth. Treat it that way. $1 million in net worth is a genuine achievement. It represents years of discipline and compounding and making the right calls when it was not easy to make them. But if 700,000 of that million is locked inside a wall you live in, you do not have $1 million of freedom. You have $300,000 of freedom in a very expensive place to sleep. That distinction is the whole game. And most people spend decades building toward the wrong number. If you are at 35 to 55 and this reframe changes how you think about retirement math, hit subscribe. This is the Compound Classroom. We do one of these every week. Drop your ratio in the comments. Not your actual liquid number, just how it compares to your total. Something like 6 to 10, meaning 600,000 liquid out of $1 million total, or 3 to 10. I read all of them. I will see you in the next one.